And yeah, welcome everybody. So yeah, this is book club. We're the thumbnail says mutual aid. I need to change the thumbnail and everything, but we actually switched to Franz Fanon's or Fanon's. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name perfectly correctly, but the Wretched of the Earth. I'm really glad that we picked this. We were doing mutual aid, and we got to the chapter mutual aid of the savages, and I just started reading it and was like, I just can't. I just can't. When I was in school, we would read stuff that would be like really sexist or racist, and I would like compartmentalize it because I want to get through school. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not in school. We don't have to read this work. We can read other things that aren't messed up. And Peter Kropotkin sounds like a very nice person, minus the racism and stuff like that. I just don't. We don't need to do that. So we voted on a new book, and we voted on this, and I'm so happy. Shout out to Villainous. He has a channel called Overthrow Media. If you haven't checked it out, definitely watch it. He's the one he actually had a video being like, how are we going to understand leftist work without reading Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth? And I was like, whoa. He always gives me the best suggestions of things to watch and read. So I was like, okay, if he's saying that you have to read this book, I'm putting on the list. And this is the book that we all voted for to read. So I'm very, very excited. The way that we're going to do this book club is I'm going to kind of present on Franz Fanon. Then I'm going to go over the foreword, ask some questions. I'm going to go over the preface and ask some questions, and then we'll kind of have a discussion and wrap up. I'm going to try to cut this off at an hour because I don't want it to meander. I know people have jobs and stuff like that. But first, before we dive in, I wanted to see if everyone to give an introduction. And oh wait, you know what? Can people hear me? Oh gosh, technical difficulties. People can hear me, right? This is working.
We can hear you on Discord. Not sure about YouTube, but
YouTube, can you guys hear me? Can someone just say in the comments in the live chat, I can hear you, or I can't hear you if you can't hear me? Sorry, the chat's probably a little bit behind because it's okay. Thanks, Jessica. Um, Okay, good. So everyone can hear us. My computer's not being super laggy at the moment, which I'm really surprised at. Awesome. So before we dive into book club, if you just want to just give like an introduction of yourself, say your pronouns, name, if you have a channel or some other project that you're working on, feel free to let everyone know about it. But hi, I'm Lua. I'm Professor Flowers. This is my channel. We're having a book club, and we're going to study some leftist work. So yeah. Clark, do you want to go next?
sure, yeah. I'm Clark. Use he/him pronouns. So I'm actually housemates with Lua here. We've been kind of trying to on and off for I guess almost the past year now. Like put together a book club, and for a while it was just like us and Lua's partner. Was a good longtime friend of mine. And yeah, now we're opening it up and putting it on the channel. So yeah, a little bit about me. I guess I would say I became sort of re-interested in leftism. I became like all my friends in my early 20s were self-espoused anarchists and socialists, and like when I was first introduced to those ideas, I was like, what, this is an actual political philosophy? And I kind of started to call myself an anarchist without really knowing what it was, but I was kind of introduced to those ideas, and then I sort of drifted out of that friends group. It became more of my periphery, and then I sort of sunk back into liberalism without really knowing what that was either. And a series of events made me realize that if I was going to be involved in understanding politics, that I felt the obligation to learn as much as I could. And in mid 2019, I just started with BreadTube, and I started looking at politics, not explicitly leftist stuff, but within a matter of weeks, I realized that my political sentiments had already been explored and formalized under the terms socialism and anarchism. And I was like, oh, okay. So, these are things that I've sort of conclusions that I've arrived to my own, and things that I've been introduced to, or, in other ways, and it was nice to see that those were formalized under leftism. So that's where my political learning started. And yeah, since I would say like October of 2019, I've just tried to dive in as hard and as deep as I can into learning as much as I can about politics and leftist politics in general. Yeah, cool. That's me.
Awesome. Do you want to go, JV?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. All right, just making sure. Yeah, so I use he, him pronouns. My thing says JB. Y'all can call me Josue, which is my real name. But yeah, my name is Josue. I use he, him pronouns. I predominantly make content about music and hip hop. It started out as sort of a review, just a review channel where I would take songs and do a classic like channel off, some kind of hating on it, but like I kind of evolved and changed my way to where I do a lot of queer readings and a lot of like much needed like queer and leftist looks at a lot of hip hop music. I'm here because I've always been. I grew up in a place also where I predominantly liberal, and I've slowly gone farther and farther left. And I think my biggest weakness about all of it is that I don't read, and it's not even like a thing where like, I don't read at all. Like I can't remember the last time I read a fiction book. So like I'm using this as an opportunity to make myself more literate, learn some more experiences, learn some more theory, and hopefully improve myself as time goes along and be able to practice what I preach a little bit better every day.
That's awesome. Thanks, Josue. Conrad, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Conrad. I use he and him. I was a child of the Cold War, so I kind of grew up thinking that communism was grim, gray totalitarianism, as that was pretty much how it was posed throughout my childhood. I kind of came to the left end of things by way of an interest in global politics, realpolitik, and the like. Read a lot about that, and also by way of being very interested in moral philosophy. And the last year or so gave me an opportunity to do a lot more reading than I've had a chance to do in a long time, and just started reading stuff on leftist literature, that kind of thing, mostly recommendations from Lua and some other channels, and realized that the left end of the spectrum was not as it had been presented to me in my youth, and I've come around to thinking that it's really just about the only morally tenable position to take. So that's me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Ellie, would you like to go?
Yeah, hello. I'm Ellie. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I run a YouTube channel called Red Letter Days with my wife and my life. We talk about mostly just like the usual leftist things, ranging from media analysis to like topical analysis and stuff like that. I got into leftism, I think around 6th grade. It was around the like first election of Barack Obama, and as like a clueless middle schooler, I was like, well, Obama seems like a really cool guy bringing change and everything, and like I'm an impoverished person. I really need change here too. So sounds good. But the Republicans on TV kept calling him a socialist, and I'm like, well, what's a socialist? and I Googled it and was like, oh, Obama's not a socialist, but I am. uh, and kind of went on from there. But yeah, that's pretty much me.
That's really funny. Yeah, I love that story. Thanks so much, Ellie. You have NMS. Would you like to go?
Yes, hi. My name is Nicole, so you can just call me Nicole. She, her pronouns. And I'm really excited to be part of this book club and reading Franz Fanon. Read a bit of Black Skin, White Masks in a Spanish class and understanding how race is understood in Spanish history and literature. But I'm actually a graduate student now in more of a STEM field, and I think a lot of my future interests will be to continue bringing more humanist and I don't know, leftist thinking into just how academia works, especially STEM fields, since not exactly known for keeping up with what might be actually I don't know, morally correct in academia, to put it poorly, but to put it one way. Yeah, that's me.
That's awesome, Nicole. I'm so glad that you're here. That's great. Well, welcome everyone. This is super exciting that we're doing this. I'm gonna just check the stream, make sure that there's no sound issues, because I just want to do that intermittently. Maybe read some comments. Oh, there's an Amberly critique of mutual aid. I'm definitely going to check that out. Yeah. Okay. Also, yeah, I should have mentioned this. So, Josue, your mic's a little bit choppy when you talk. We can understand you, but it's like just a little bit choppy. So okay, but I'm gonna start doing an introduction, and Josue, feel free to interrupt me to test out your mic and stuff too. But I'm just gonna kind of start talking. So I want to start off doing an introduction of Franz Fanon, because every time I read a book, I do think it's important to go over the author. Oh, you know what? I'm not screen sharing. I'm going to the screen myself. So share your screen. Yes. Oh my gosh. It's like, oh no, I think I might have to restart the stream. Okay, whatever. Okay, so I don't know if I can screen share. Can I? Are y'all seeing the screen? Are y'all seeing the screen for the...
I can see your screen.
If you can see my screen, then everyone else should be able to see my screen. Hopefully you can see it.
Yeah, I can see.
It's literally just a picture of Franz Fanon, and he's just, I hope I'm doing this right. It's just a picture of him, but I don't have too many visuals, so if you can't see it, it's not the end of the world. But this is him. Yeah, his life... Oh.
Hear me?
Yeah. Is that you, Josue?
Can you hear me right now? Okay, we're good.
Oh, you sound so much better. You sound so good. Okay, awesome.
Awesome.
Okay, so I like to go over just the person before I read the book, because oftentimes if you just read a Wikipedia page about that person, even if it's just that, you end up learning so much more and putting more context into why they're writing what they're writing. And so I like to just do a little bit of just a quick little research of who this person is. So this is Franz Fanon, obviously, and he had a very sad life. It was very much defined by the French colonization. He was born on the Caribbean island of Martinique. I hope I'm saying that right, but he was born on the Caribbean island of Martinique, and at the time it was a French colony. And at the moment, it's a French single territorial collectivity. So basically what that means is that the people on that island can rule themselves, but also only to a certain extent. It's still kind of colonized at the end of the day. So Franz Fanon was growing up in the shadow of that. His father, Felix Casimir Fanon, was a descendant of African slaves. and he worked as a customs agent. His mother, Eleanor Medelis, all these names are French, and I don't speak French, and I'm butchering it. I'm really sorry. But his mother was a white Alsatian descent, and worked as a shopkeeper. So I think I looked it up, and I think that was German or something like that. But she was basically like half white. And so I think that's really important to point out that Franz Fanon, he was someone who was actually mixed. He grew up with a mother who was half white, and he had a father who was black, and his father also was a descendant of slavery. And I think it's important to point out because even though Franz Fanon clearly just presents as a black person, when you're mixed, there's like a lot of complications that come with it. For example, I'm half Chinese. You're never going to know that I'm half Chinese by looking at me, but I am, and I'm very proud to be Chinese. But it ends up getting erased because of how we view race and stuff like that. And a lot of times when you're mixed, you only get seen as one thing, even though you have like other parts, other different like races in you. And really, I think a lot of times why this is so important is because being mixed just kind of like throws how we view race out the window. Because we think of race as like you have Asian people here and white people over here and black people over here. And when you're mixed, it's like, well, then what are you if you're like 3 or 4 different things, or if you're 2 different things? Then I think it's really important to understand that a part of his view, that he grew up with that kind of like dichotomy. So yeah, eventually during the World War II, the Nazi Germany took over France, and what that meant is that their island, the island of Martinique, or is it Martinique? Martinique. Their island was like kind of in disarray, and the French Navy took over the island, and they were very racist. And Franz Fanon actually defined them as behaving as authentic racists, and it was another brutal reminder of how cruel colonizers were. So again, he's living in the shadow of being colonized by the French. When the Navy took over, they were like harassing people, they were, assaulting people, and they were just being very brutal towards these people because they were colonized, and they felt they had the power to just be cruel. And they also couldn't leave the island as well, so they were just like trapped there with these awful people. So Franz Fanon, he basically fled. He fled this awful situation and joined the Free French Forces. And the French forces fought the Axis powers, but he also did that to get away from this awful occupation. And then, so he did that, and then after the war, sorry, I'm just like I wish I had visuals and things to make this look nice, but I just was really exhausted. So actually, I don't even need to share my screen for this because this is like a lot of text. So I'm just going to actually stop doing that. You can just see our faces. That might be a little bit more interesting since I don't have pictures. But after the war, he goes and studies under, oh my gosh, Aimé Césaire. I'm saying that wrong. But there's this person named Aimé Césaire, who was basically a major influence on his life. And this person was like a politician and an author and writer. And he studied under him and also was his friend. And he later on, after that, moved to France and studied psychiatry, literature, and philosophy. And he later on, after that, after studying all that, he was very educated. He became the chief of service at the Bilda Joinville Psychiatric Hospital in Algeria. And this is kind of where the Algerian Revolution comes in. So in Algeria, they were colonized by the French. And basically, they were like, that's not going to happen anymore. So the Algerians basically formed the National Liberation Front, and they rebelled against their French colonizers, and Fanon joined this National Liberation Front. And he was at this hospital, being like the head like psychiatrist guy, and he helped soldiers who tortured Algerians, which is really messed up. Like, could you imagine helping soldiers who tortured Nigerians or Algerians, and you're like a black person, like helping these soldiers who tortured people? Like, that's really messed up. And then he also treated Algerians who were tortured. And unfortunately, the Wikipedia article doesn't go too much into this because I think, honestly, this is probably what really messed him up. Like, there's a lot of things in his life that messed him up, but this is probably it. But by the summer of 1956, Fanon realized that he couldn't work under, like, under the French. And so he left. And that's when he really starts to work with the NLF. To kind of wrap things up, he moved to Tunisia. He became the ambassador to Ghana for the provincial Algerian government, which was established by the NLF. So he was a very prominent figure in the NLF and the Algerian Revolution. And then later on, when he was only 36, he gets leukemia in its very late stage, and unfortunately, they aren't able to diagnose it, and he passes away. And this is kind of a good point to go off onto the Wretched of the Earth, the Foreword, because that's where the Foreword takes off. It's brutal. It's brutal. So for the Foreword, it's written by Homi Bhaba, and it literally starts off with the death of Franz Fanon. He's like, Franz Fanon's legend in America starts with the story of his death, and it's just like, that's just where we begin. I think that's just really brutal because it just sets the tone of this book. It's like, let me just like read something. It's so sad. So this is page 8 in Roman numerals still, if anyone you want to turn to it. And it's the same as the PDF that's posted. But so Bhaba says, perhaps it was written of the Wretched of the Earth in a feverish spurt between April and July of 1961 that contributed to this fateful delay, when his wife, Josie Fanon, read him the enthusiastic early reviews of the book, but he could only say, that won't give me back my bone marrow. On the day of his death, the French police seized copies of The Wretched of the Earth from the Paris bookshops. After his death, Simone de Beauvoir remembered seeing Fanon's photograph all over Paris for a couple of weeks, on the cover of Jean Afrique in the window of Maspero bookstore. And this is a quote. She says that he looked younger, calmer than I'd ever seen him, and very handsome. And that's how the Foreword starts. The Foreword starts off with him being like, this person's like on his deathbed, and he didn't want to be in a French hospital, and that's also part of why he didn't get treatment for his leukemia right away, because that's how much he didn't want to associate himself with the French, because the French colonized his home, and also colonized Algeria, and that's like how much he hated the French. So he like literally refused treatment from these people. And then as he's like dying, he like wrote his last book, which is this, The Wretched of the Earth. It's his last book that he wrote. And his wife's like, oh, like you have all these great reviews of this book. And Franz Fanon's like, I'm not going to get my bone marrow back. And he like doesn't trust these people. And it's like, it's brutal. And the reason why I think this is really important is because I think it's really showing how, it's really showing like how messed up this Algerian war, like what it's done to him. You know, it's like really showing like this person has like lived their entire life. This person has lived their entire life in colonization and fighting colonization, and on their deathbed this is kind of like the result of someone who is fighting it their whole life. Like on their deathbed, they're like so distrustful and just so angry and bitter. And that is setting the tone of this book. And I just think that is brutal and I love it. Yeah. So I'm going to read some quotes of some stuff. And let's just kind of like talk about them for a little bit. And I'll try to like I don't want to keep this running too long because, again, people have jobs. But I do want to get some discussion going on. Sorry, this one quote I'm looking for. Oh, really fast, while I'm looking for that quote, there's some stuff with the IMF. So, to like just go over that really fast. So, like with the IMF, it's the International Monetary Fund, and then there's a World Bank. So they're basically an international like loan lenders, and they give people loans, or they give country loans. They don't give like people loans and stuff like that. So basically, I need to learn more about this, but from what I understand, there's like a bunch of loans. Like the poorest countries in the world are generally found in Africa, and there was a lot of loans given by the IMF and the World Bank that they just shouldn't have given. And then basically there's like an amount, there was like this oil crash too that also contributed to this, but like these countries like can't, or like have an impossibility of like paying their loans back. Like a lot of these countries literally just can't. And so um it's mentioned in here that like the IMF and the World Bank kind of function as like these colonizers in themselves. And I just think that's like, I'm not going to go super into depth about that, but it's mentioned in here, and I think it's just like important to understand like on a global scale. And it's something I need to also understand more. But let's see. Sorry, I should have also prepared this better, but there's just so much reading. So it's kind of just like a mess of notes. So I'm just going to read a quote, and this is on page 20 or XX. This is on page XX, which is 20. And if people have a hard time reading Roman numerals, just let me know and I'll explain it. But if everyone does seem to understand, then, you know. Okay, so this quote is, it is the Manichaean mentality, which Manichaean is like good versus evil. It's like very much like a dichotomy. You have like these two extremes. So it is the Manichaean mentality that goes with such racial cultural discriminations and the economic divisions set up to accommodate and to authorize them, that create the violent psychoaffective conditions that Fanon describes in The Wretched of the Earth. The colonial vocabulary is shot through with arrogance, antagonism, and anxiety. Those hysterical masses, their blank faces, this vegetative existence. The colonized, who are often devoid of a public voice, resort to dreaming, imagining, acting out, embedding the reactive vocabulary of violence and retributive justice in their bodies, their psyches. To blow the colonial world to smithereens is henceforth a clear image within the grasp of and imagination of every colonized subject. To dislocate the colonial world, to destroy the colonist sector. Challenging the colonial world is not a rational confrontation of viewpoints. It is not a discourse on the universal, but the impassioned claim by the colonized that their world is fundamentally different. So I guess I wanted to talk about I don't know if I actually have a question for this one. I think this one is really just trying to point out just like the dehumanization of like the way that like it's divided by the by the colonial world, where it's like there's like a fundamental difference between the colonizers and the colonized, and that fundamental difference is like is dehumanization. But one thing I wanted to talk about, or maybe talk with you all about, was the Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt. So this forward's also kind of defending Fanon from Hannah Arendt. So it says here. So it describes Hannah Arendt's assault on the book. This is page 21. Hannah Arendt's assault on the book in the late 60s was an attempt at staunching the wildfire it spread across university campuses, while she readily acknowledged that it was really Sartre's Preface that glorified violence by Fanon's words or wishes. So Hannah Arendt doesn't like this book because she says that it's like, very violent. And she really doesn't like Sartre's opening to this because it's kind of like condoning. It's supporting that violence, and that's really sad for me to read because I there's so many things by her that I really like. So it's like, for me, it's sad, and I kind of want to hear. This is where I kind of want to open up, start asking questions for you guys, because I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the violence in this. So I'm going to read some quotes, and then I will actually ask a question this time. So when the Algerians reject, this is page 35. When the Algerians reject any method which does not include violence, they know that such madness alone can deliver them from colonial oppression. A new type of relationship is established in the world. The peoples of the third world are in the process of shattering their chains, and what is extraordinary is that they succeed. Hannah Arendt's objection to the wretched of the earth has less to do with the occurrence of violence than with Fanon's teleological belief that the world's process would end in a new humanism, a new planetary relation to freedom defined by the third world. And then on page 36, it goes on to say, for Arendt, Fanon's violence leads to the death of politics. For Sartre, it draws the theory first of human freedom. I propose a different reading. Fanonian violence, in my view, is a part of a struggle for psychoaffective survival and a search for human agency in the midst of the agony of oppression. It does not offer a clear choice between life and death or slavery and freedom because it confronts the colonial condition of life in death. Fanon's phenomenology of violence conceives of the colonized body, soul, cultural community, history in a process of continued agony, then a total disappearance. He describes a state of political consciousness and psychic being with a harrowing accuracy. Exploitation, tortures, raids, and racism, collective liquidations make of the native an object in the hands of occupying nation. The object man without means of existing, without a raison d'etre, is broken in the very depth of his substance. The desire to live, to continue, becomes more and more indecisive, more and more phantom-like. It is at this stage that all the well-known guilt complex appears. Does the guilt complex lie in at every origins of violence, or does the struggle for liberation have to violently free itself in order to be effective? The double-edged nature of this question, guilt as a stimulant or an obstacle to freedom, or possibly both, fulfills Fanon's wish, expressed to Sartre and Bhaba, that all political leaders should be psychiatrists as well. Oh, that was a lot to read. I don't know if that was like, oh, I'm sorry. I just like put a bunch of quotes that I liked in a document and then I just read like 5 minutes of text. But basically what that's talking about is how Hannah Arendt doesn't like Franz Fanon because she's like, oh, like this person's really violent. And then Sartre is saying like there has to be violence. And then Bhaba is saying like Sartre is saying that like Fanon doesn't necessarily you kind of like have these like two dichotomies where it's like Hannah Arendt's like no violence, and then Sartre is saying like there needs to be violence, and this person's kind of saying like there's like this in between space of where there needs that the people who are colonized are like living. It's not life or death. It's more like the colonized are living in death. And so it's kind of asking, what do you do with that specific scenario? And that's kind of where I wanted to open up the question. I want to ask first, does that make sense? And then second off, what are your opinions on violence? Because I think a lot of this book is around violence. Yeah. I've been talking for a long time, so I want to open up to you guys.
I wanted to ask really fast before we give answers. Is this sort of like we wait until you open the floor, or if we have like a thought, we raise our hand, or like how does the discussion work?
I guess you can just, whoever starts talking first can go. I want it to be like an open discussion. Yeah, just whoever starts talking first. And also, your mic's a little bit choppy again. I can still understand you, but it started to be choppy again for some reason.
My life, hang on.
I guess just to start a little bit, I think I see, like on a smaller scale, a little bit of parallelism between, I think, like we want change to happen. How fast do we go? What are the means that we like take to acquire that change? Like that kind of, like you can see that kind of conflict even playing at like on a different level in a different way in just like American like left-leaning politics, right? Where it's just like, no, we need to go slow so that there's no violence, but then like literally people are dying all the time. There's like no access to, or limited access for a lot of people to water and food and the things to even be able to support yourself. And so I think yeah, I can just see this continual questioning of like how violent and how far do we go to like get the things that people really need to survive, like happening everywhere.
Yeah, those was my thoughts exactly. It's very relevant right now, where like everything that happened this summer. Again, most of the protests were peaceful, but there were riots, and people were really condemning that. And it's like, well, what do you do? What do you do when when like are people going to like listen to you if you try to do things peacefully? Because like people have been the issue of police brutality has been going on since the existence of the police. And so how do you get people to like even listen? It's all, yeah. I think
Okay.
yeah, you sound good again. You sound great.
Awesome. It's just weird. I might have to switch computers maybe if things get bad enough, but
Yeah, that's fine. Also, it's getting to be on the hour, and I was gonna cut it off at an hour, but if anyone needs to just go, just hop off. I think I'm just gonna keep on going because I think I'm just gonna keep on going in case anyone wants to use this as a in case anyone wants to use this like as a just as a, like their own study thing for like if they're reading Franz Fanon or something. But if it's starting to get to the hour, so if anyone has to hop off, that's fine. And just yeah.
good.
But yeah, anyone else have any thoughts on the questions of the use of violence?
I think that
Yeah.
violence.
I think
Sorry. If everyone else wants to go, it's okay.
I think that when he's talking about Arendt, her objection being less to do with the occurrence of violence than with Fanon's teleological belief that the whole process would end in a new humanism. I think she's worried about the end result of the violence, and I think the point of the quote that you read, the extended quote, was that there's something one has to do when one's house is on fire. Basically, that there's an immediacy that to the problem that Arendt doesn't really see from her perspective. And I personally, I kind of see both sides of that. I really see that something really needs to be done now, but the outcome of widespread violence tends to be pretty catastrophic as well. And so there's a real question of how far do you push things.
For me, the line begins and ends sort of when it stops being self-defense. But like that's sort of like a pretty easy way to put it, is that it's like when you draw parallels to the US to now, where our lives are genuinely on the line every single day. So it's only reasonable, like you said, like there's an immediacy to your house being on fire. So like there's only so much there's only so much one can take, and so much there's just something that people feel they need to immediately do. And I think it was in the quote too about agency, where like the ability for us to even defend our lives is called into a moral question, and is being into us is it morally reprehensible for us to have a desire to live? So like so like there's this intensity that to participate in that, just to get that thought out of our mind at all. That's what I felt the guilt complex was referring to, like in that sense. So I think that there probably exists a certain point where it's no longer self-defense. I just definitely can't see where it is. I've never really been close to that. I do agree more with Homi than other ones, is that like predominantly you should have a desire to complete things without violence. That should be an innate desire, because violence in and of itself is not okay. It's not a pointless violence. But when it's self-defense, as strongly as it is for them and for us, I pose the question, what are we supposed to do? You know?
I think one of the points I think Sartre was making in the preface was something along the lines of just like the colonist settler Western people are going to see the violence conducted against them, but ignore the fact that the violence wasn't a new thing, that the violence was always there. That the violence of the colonized peoples is coming from a place of like multiple centuries of like absolutely horrid brutality and intolerable conditions that like there could be no other sorry for some reason I'm really nervous about being on stream. um but yeah, mostly just that the violence is already there, and like if we want to center in the American perspective to like ground it in our present reality of just like the daily reality of police brutality means that the riots are inevitable, and they can't stop until the other side stops. That like in a sense, no one wants to do violence. I don't think. No one wants to have to do a rebellion. No one wants to have to go through all the trouble and darkness of like revolutionary action. But like the reality forces our hands, etc.
I think I haven't read Hannah Arendt's work. I'm not very familiar with it, but I think another important thing to think about is like who is considering what actions violent. So again, going back to what we were seeing over the summer, you know, there was a lot of coverage of like the quote unquote like violence, even though we know a lot of protests were peaceful, the violence of these protests when, you know, the things that you were seeing on screen was like looting a store. And it's like, well, if no, like, is that violent, or are we just considering like harming people's like physical person and their access to care for themselves violence? And I do think that in current media, like harming property is considered way more violent than maybe we should generally think it is.
That's a great point. I actually never thought of it like that. I'm wondering how many, like, my knowledge, I'm sure there are a couple of propaganda pieces from Fox News that say otherwise, but like from what I was reading, which was, I feel, predominantly honest, I can't tell how many articles I actually read were like protesters were actually physically attacking or hurting cops. I don't think a lot of that was really talked about. I don't think that a lot of the protesters, even at their most like destructive, wherever they were ever really doing anything to harm policemen other than what was like immediately self-defense, like throwing the gas canisters back or trying to get them off them whenever they were on them. And even then, even if they were doing that, the police were clearly much more armed and not taking as much damage. So like at what point are we even really being violent towards the police if we're not really doing any damage other than property and feelings, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely like that's definitely like was the thing that was going through my head while I was reading this stuff on violence, where it's like yeah, and Sartre gets more into it, so it might be good to start talking about his preface. But before I move on to it, just to summarize the foreword. The foreword's really kind of going over stuff with Franz Fanon's life and also this book, and kind of like defending it, kind of from people like Hannah Arendt, who are saying like that violence isn't going to lead to humanity. And I think Sartre goes into it more. I like the foreword, but it's kind of hard to understand if you haven't read the book before. I think that's very common with a lot of forewords. They'll kind of go over the book, and it's nice. Sometimes it's nice to read the foreword after you've read the book, because it's kind of like a nice summary and a nice analysis. But and one more thing to note too is that the foreword, he also mentions how he thinks that people should be political leaders if he mentions how Franz Fanon thinks people should be political leaders if they understand psychology. as we know Franz Fanon did. And also Sartre mentions that too. But I think it's very interesting to note that comes up multiple times, like the psychological effects of colonization that are on people, and how that's very very much emphasized in the foreword and by the preface and by Fanon. So just something to keep in mind. I'm going to read the comments in the chat before I start reading the. There's a lot of comments. Oh my gosh. I'm just going to gloss through the comments just because I want to interact with everyone here before I go on to the preface. So let's talk about the IMF, international loan sharking, and other forms of international aid is the real globalism that the fascists won't tell you about. That's very true, Draxis. Yep, same with helping Venezuela, Ecuador, and a few other South American countries, horribly indebted now. Yep. It's like this awful rabbit hole to go down to when you read about the IMF and World Bank. Benoplusty says Sartre's info is messy. Oh my gosh, Benoplusty, get in. Okay, Benoplusty says I'm actually reading this book right now. It's like, get in the book club. What are you doing? Get on here. As far as for anyone watching, if you're a Patreon, you can just join and I'll send you the link to the just get on here, you know?
Give Professor Flowers $1, guys.
Just give me $1. I think some of these people might actually be patrons though. I think they're just not in the stream. It's really funny, but whatever. I'm glad people are here. So Draxa says, I think our society has a collective go-to mental image of like the French Revolution and sympathetic but ultimately wrong supervillains when we talk about revolutionary violence. Yeah. Oh, Molly Solomon says, I follow Pink Spots. I just saw that come up. I'm really glad. I love Pink Spots. So Draxa says, I've never seen a single instance protester attacked cops. There was a police station burned down, but I didn't hear about any police sustaining injury. And yeah, like same here. Like I haven't, the only times it's been like self-defense. I was at a protest and the police started throwing flashbangs at us, and then someone shot fireworks at a police car, and that's like the only violence that I've seen. I've only heard of things like that, or like throwing the tear gas canisters back, things like that. Yeah, it's pretty interesting to read this, especially during this time where it's like after the protests and everything. So let's skip to the preface, because I think the preface is a little bit.
Rioters.
Sorry, say that again.
Sorry. So I think the Capitol rioters probably like harmed more cops than we did.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, they literally they killed a cop. They killed more cops than the Black Lives Matter protesters ever killed, even though there were anti-police protests. Like they killed more police than we ever did, and it's like we're still like the terrorists. It's like that was so frustrating to watch. That was just okay. I won't even start ranting about that because we're already going so over the time. And again, if anyone needs to go, that's totally okay. This reading was a lot longer than I thought it was. I thought it was going to be 30 pages, so my bad. But I think it's important stuff to go through. I was very just blown away. I was like, wow, this normally when I read the preface, I'm like, okay, whatever, yeah. And this time I was like, oh my gosh, like it's brutal. It starts off with his death. And it's just like, it just sets the tone. It's so depressing. Oh my gosh. So the preface is written by Jean-Paul Sartre. I'm sorry I'm saying his name wrong. I'm going to butcher all of these French names. At least I don't say Sartre. It's not as bad as that, but I say Sartre. It's probably like Sartre, but I'm messing it up. But it's written by Jean-Paul Sartre. I thought it was really interesting because I've read a lot of Sartre because I was a philosophy major, and I thought I didn't like reading him. I didn't like him at all, and I am shocked because I loved this preface. I was like, Sartre's spitting. I was like, what? I just didn't expect that. I just like some of the stuff I read. If you've like read the stuff that I read by Sartre, like I'm just like flabbergasted. I had no idea. Like this like white French dude who's like also kind of sexist, I think. But then he has like a very like open progressive relationship. So maybe I'm thinking of someone. I'm like, am I thinking of someone else? Because Sartre's spitting. Anyways, so the preface starts off. This is page 43. XLIII. And L is 40, and then X is 10, so it's like 10 wait, no, L is 50, sorry. In Roman numerals, L is 50, and then X is 10, so like X is before the L, which means it's before 10 before 50, which means it's 40, and then there's 3 I's, which means it's 43. I don't know if that makes sense if I'm just explaining it, but that's how you read Roman numerals. So page 43. So it says, not so long ago, the Earth numbered 2 billion inhabitants, 500 million men and 1.5 billion natives. The first possessed the world, the others borrowed it, and the others borrowed it. When I first read that, I was like, wait, what does he mean by that? What does he mean by like men and natives in quotes? And I was like, is this like going to be like a racist intro to the Wretched of the Earth? But no, it's actually really like, without rambling too much, like when he says, let me like pull up so that way some people can see the text. When he says, not so long ago, the Earth numbered 2 billion inhabitants, men and 1.5 billion natives. The first who possessed the world, the others borrowed it. I'm almost positive that what he's saying when he says that, I'm almost positive that he's saying that like that colonizers are trying to possess the world, and those are the people that we think of as being men. And the people who borrow it are people who like use the world, but they're not trying to own it. It's just like they're using the world. Kind of like when you think about like indigenous people, like a lot of indigenous people in the US like didn't necessarily own land. Like there were like territories and things like that, but like they didn't own it. And when people found out about the way that like Western colonizers owned a piece of land, like you had a title, people were like, what? It's like owning the air, where it's like you own land. Like that was just that's weird to a lot of different cultures. And I think Sartre is kind of talking about a little bit of that, how it's like people, colonizers are trying to literally own the land, and everyone else is like, well, we're just trying to use it, and you're like literally trying to own it. And that concept is getting pushed on everybody. And I think it's very poetic how he starts off with that, because the way that he uses the word men, as in human, which is kind of, it's annoying because, there's all these different genders, but the way that he's using the word men is in the context of colonization, is actually like really putting the spotlight on how it's kind of like this, like, not dehumanizing, but like the way that like colonization turns you into men, but really like you're a colonizer. I feel like they can at times be used interchangeably, but how like it forces you to become this certain type of person through colonization. And it does this to the people who are colonizing, and then it does this to the people who are colonized. And I think it's very poetic how he does that. Like it starts off, and I like started reading, and I was like, wait, what? Is this gonna be racist? Because, he's like a white French dude in like the 40s or something. Or like this is the 60s. But I'm like, I'm just like, oh, come on. Sorry, what'd you say? Oh no, it's a little bit choppy.
I was gonna correct 60. Oh, come on, I hate this.
Oh no, it's good. It's good.
I'll be right back.
No, okay.
There's
I
just a delay.
just threw in that it was 60. Okay.
Yeah, there is delay. I just didn't catch that. Dang it.
But yeah, all I said was I was just gonna correct that it was 60s and not the 40s.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's all I was gonna say.
Yeah, this is written in 61. Yeah, so I'm just like kind of rambling because I think Sartre's like kind of fascinating to me, but I love how poetic this opening is. I have so much underlined so I didn't plan out what I was going to ask questions. I have like so much of this underlined. I don't know if you can see. It's like this for pages, and I know we can't go over all of it, so I'm just trying to look and see what I think is like the most.
I have some quotes written down too that I really like.
Oh, cool. Do you want to read some?
I mostly picked the ones that, because I didn't get to finish it, unfortunately. Yeah. But writing down the ones that I really like. I was mostly just kind of writing down the ones that I thought were like really poignant even today.
Yes, I was doing that too.
My favorite ones that I read was Europe now lives in such a mad, reckless pace that she's running headlong into the abyss. That one, that one was pretty. That one was, especially where we're at now with that one.
Yeah.
But I think the one that I liked the most was that hypothetical Frenchman conversation that he talked about, where, because that's the thing about like Sartre. I forget how does it. How did you? How do
Well,
we
I
decide how
say
to pronounce it?
Sartre, but it's not how you say it. Like in French, it's I'm butchering it. Like there's like 3 different American ways to say it, and they're all wrong. So yeah.
Paul Sartre.
So let's go with Sartre.
Wait, say that,
Because
Conrad.
I think what makes
Jean-Paul Sartre.
See, I can't do that.
Sartre.
Sartre.
Yeah, Sartre.
Jean.
Je parle un peu de français.
That's why I'm just like Sartre.
Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre is the Frenchman conversation. And that's what I kind of liked about it. About the word is that it feels very like cheeky and fun. It's kind of like why it feels good. I think for me, the Frenchman conversation is just so like he's all like, this country is dying unless he's like now his word must be treated as fact, everything right, and like that just definitely like for me reminded me of a lot of like just like the dissonance that it's weird how everyone can feel the exact same way of something is wrong, but like everyone has a different idea and everyone feels like if we just did that literally perfectly everything would be okay. And I think it leads really well from like Homi's foreword of, I think he's the one who said it, of like there's no rational discussion to be had on how to fix this. The people want it to be one. And that is where we exist in the never-ending hellscape of we have to if we want to fix things, we have to rationalize something that is probably the most irrational thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
Colonize. And as long as we're trapped in that foolish, borderline comedic contradiction, there's nothing that's ever going to get done. And that's how I took that little section.
Dang, that's like such a good summary. Like, yeah, that's like, sorry, like I feel like that's like the crux of the preface right there. Yeah.
Colonization is absurd.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what it felt. There was just a lot of really cheeky and like very like comedic like tones in a lot of what he was saying, and it really felt overall he wanted to point out like this colonization thing, it's pretty absurd. So like that's at least what I took from what I did. Right? I don't want to downplay any like seriousness that was really in there, but I think like he was pretty loose with it, and I can understand why Hannah. There's probably with that loose tone, I can understand why Hannah would probably make some objections to like some violent thing he said if he's talking about it in this tone. So so that's sort of my interpretation of probably where that came from now, because I mostly read the preface. I didn't read the foreword because I was using a different PDF that didn't have the foreword for some reason. Because I had found one, sent one. I was like, oh,
there's a lot online. Yeah, it's actually
so
really
actually
cool.
make like yeah. So like, I mean, it'd be weird if this leftist work was behind only a paywall. I think it'd be ironic, but yeah, I think like it really does feel like Homi was very like, oh man, I understand what Sartre was going for. It just kind of feels like they were all on the same page in general with it, and it feels so good to see it flow together when they were both all on the same page. You know, if there was a little disagreement over like how far to go and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh gosh, yeah, I like loved this. I loved this so much. There was this, I want to maybe just read, I thought of a quote to read. So this is on page 43 again, the first page of the preface. So it's the bottom paragraph. So, oh, I didn't mean to, shoot. I'm like opening up a Word document. So, I'm trying to find, okay, I'm just going to read it. So I was going to try to pull up the quote on the screen so people can read it, because it's kind of hard to just hear a wall of text, but I'll just read it. So it says, then it was over. The mouths opened of their own accord. The black and yellow voices still talked of our humanism, but it was to blame us for our inhumanity. We quite happily listened to these polite displays of bitterness. At first we were amazed and proud. What? They can chat all on their own? Look what we did with them. And this is talking about like colonizers and the colonized. So this is talking about like how people are critiquing the colonizers and how they're like really bitter. The people who are colonized are like really bitter about being colonized. And so the colonizers are like saying like, look what we did with them. There was no doubt in our minds they accepted our ideal since they were accusing us of not respecting it. Europe then really believed in its mission. It had Hellenized the Asians and created this new species, the Greco-Roman blacks. Pragmatic as ever, we added, quite among ourselves. Oh, let them shout. It will get it out of their systems. Their bark is worse than their bite. Then came another generation, which shifted the question. Its writers and poets took enormous pains to explain to us that our values poorly matched the reality of their lives, and that they could neither quite reject them nor integrate them. Roughly this meant you are making monsters out of us. Your humanism wants us to be universal, and your racist practices are differentiating us. And that quote just really resonated with me, because the idea that its writers and poets took enormous pains to explain to us that our values poorly match the reality of their lives and that they can neither quite reject them nor integrate them. So that you can't, so like the people who are colonized can't reject what's being forced on them. So think of an example. It's like the boarding schools that happened for indigenous people in the U.S. They were forced to be like, to assimilate into white culture. There's like these awful before and after pictures where it's like, they had this saying where it was like, kill the Indian, save the man. And it would be like, you would see these before and after pictures of an indigenous person in their traditional clothing, and then afterwards where they had like a haircut and they were like wearing like a suit. And so in this quote, like you have like these people who are forced into assimilating, and then they lose their humanity in that. They can't reject it, and they also can't fully assimilate because they're still going to be an indigenous person. And it's like that, like across the board for colonization, where it's like they want people to assimilate, and then they also fully can't because they are not a European white person. They just can't. And so like you can't reject it and you can't fully accept it. And then I love it because it says, roughly this meant you were making monsters out of us. And I just really, like, that just resonated with me because I grew up around white people, and I just really like felt that, like, I like wanted to assimilate into society, but like I literally couldn't because I'm Black. And now I don't feel that way anymore. Now I'm like, fuck assimilation, and we need to like learn to love all these different cultures and like truly love them, and not just like. But anyways, I'm kind of ranting a little bit. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Because I'm just gonna keep on going.
Yeah, I think
I do, but is anyone else? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I grew up near the Seneca Nation, and it was always interesting growing up like in the American school of like patriotism and stuff like that, where like they talk about like the Indian Citizenship Act and stuff like that. Just like, now all of the native peoples are Americans, congrats, but never like stopping to think and ask like, well, no one ever asked them if they wanted to be American or anything like that. And I also think it's interesting. Sometimes I worry that I'm putting like my own stuff in this, my reading, but like I got I think it was maybe Bhaba in the Foreword talking something to the effect of like, when citizenship is granted, it's usually like a half measure on the colonists' part, because they'll grant the citizenship and on paper all the rights, but then behind the scenes, like in France, they'll do some weird legislative nonsense. Like in America, I guess the thing would be gerrymandering and like cutting funding for like poll booths and stuff like that, so that even if you are a citizen, like really you're not going to be able to have the full range of citizenship available to you, in that this citizenship is going to like grant you certain access at the expense of like you'll get citizenship but not like equal rights in terms of like your ability as a human being to express your cultural nationhood and personhood and stuff like that.
It's like it's a symbolic thing more than anything. It's like we've taken away your heritage without fully giving you ours. So you are firmly in the middle of being lesser in our society. Just permanently. Yeah. And I forgive me, I also feel like I'm rambling. So if anyone else has anything before I go again. I think it's interesting, something you brought up about the school systems is that like you don't even really need to go to a school of all white people to feel that assimilation. I grew up in a town that was predominantly Hispanic and Mexican people. Other brown people just like me. But like that doesn't stop the assimilation process, because even though we're all brown in this school, there is a clear rewarding and a clear preference for a certain type of much more of like white behavior. I grew up like my parents very liberal, just wanted me to like be smart and not like, and like where they thought they were helping, or just very like, oh, smart, read, talk this way, and you'll be good. Don't fall into our stereotypes. So I did that, and here I am, just like getting all these A's and doing all these things. So that's what I was told, and I would like feel better than like the people around me who decided not to assimilate, who were using the Spanish slang and like deciding to participate in like what colonization made our culture. And I was clearly given preferential treatment. I was clearly treated like I had more potential, and I was clearly treated like I had more going on than those other people. And it took a long time for me to unlearn that. It took me leaving, honestly, for me to unlearn that. Because you think leaving is like the goal. When you're from a place like that, it's from in all the media. It's all like, oh, once you get out of there, you'll be made because this place is holding you back. And then I left, and the holding back didn't stop. All of that work that I put in to know all the high syllable words and to dress the way I didn't help me it didn't help me and didn't give me the preferential treatment that I was promised by my empirical educational overlords. So like, you have to list like, it's intrinsically in the education system to force whiteness onto people. That is the preferred means of education and like just general ways you should behave.
Yeah, no, I had like a really similar experience too. Like as far as like education and stuff, like I'm like actually like hyper conscious of it because like my YouTube channel is called Professor Flowers, and I was a philosophy major, and like there's like all these things. Like I grew up like thinking that yeah, like I need to like distance myself from blackness, and I thought that like doing that would be by being like educated and things like that. And it's like that's in itself is so racist. And yeah, the education system is very racist. And yeah, there was like a way where I realized like, wow, I'm, even though like I like and smart in these ways or like educated in these ways, like I'm still going to just be seen as a black person. And that's like you can't really escape that. And yeah, I kind of like learned to reject that and be like, well, that's because the world's messed up. Like, it's not bad to be black. It's not bad to be a person of color. It's everything else is actually like really fucked up. And I'm constantly like aware of like, yeah, it's like something that I think on my channel I come off as like super academic-y, and like there's a way where that's like I hope isn't like a well, I try to be like aware of that and like and say like I think it's for fun. Like I think the title or like of my channel is like for
Yeah.
fun, but it's not like a superiority thing or something like that. But um yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was like really good.
I feel like that's where the contradiction comes from, is because we as people of color, we're allowed to be academic. Like it doesn't make us any less people of color
Yeah.
to be academic either. It's
Yeah.
not. It's just the means in which it was ingrained to us was manipulative and controlling.
Exactly.
Manipulative and controlling.
Exactly. And then there's like so many people who are that's something that's like on left tube to go like on a little bit of a tangent like on like left tube like when I go into leftist spaces there are so many people of color and when I go on left tube it's like very white and then like the thing is like there's like all these like very like you have like these people who are like organizing and they're reading theory like they're very like well read and educated and they're also like organizing and they tend to be a lot of them tend to be people of color and it's like really frustrating that there's like this like perpetuated stereotype of like of non-white people not being educated when they're kind of like are a lot of these like non-white people doing like a lot of stuff and it's just kind of like my little rant there but
I could definitely go on that.
yeah uh
Dog forever.
there's something that I wanted to bring up that um uh okay, I forgot. Going back to the forward really fast, there was this quote from Franz Fanon saying each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it in relative opacity. And I kind of think that's what this book is about. I think that's like what the forward and the preface are about. And kind of going back to what you were saying, Josue, about like the whole Frenchman kind of uh like trying to like make sense of something that like fundamentally doesn't make sense. Like colonization is like the most absurd thing to try to make sense of. Uh the forward to read again ends with each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it in relative opacity. And like that's kind of just to emphasize and sorry to backtrack a little bit, but just to emphasize like that's what the preface and the forward are really about. It's like trying to like make sense of this absurd question of colonization and like how do we rise to the task of doing that in such an absurd way. And maybe the book doesn't say how, it just kind of is like, hey, this is what's up with this absurdity.
I haven't figured out how. I think like
Yeah.
again, I'm very sorry. I'm also still rambling. Feel free to stop me.
No, I like talking like
But,
this.
I think that like only really recently, like as in within the last couple of years, have we really even stopped playing this game on their playing field. Like I feel like we I think of like this big like liberal movement where like Obama was president that entire time where we thought like, oh, things are getting better. Even as far back as like when people thought, oh, things are getting better with Bill Clinton, is that like we've been fighting this thing that we know has felt wrong. We're so ingrained in colonization that the way we've been going about it and trying to fight it has sort of been wrong all along and just on their playing field. Because like it's so we have been for a long time with the likes of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. That was our way of reasonably counter-arguing colonization. Of like, okay, we'll play your little game, but can we have this purportedly progressive black president who will do these things that he never ended up doing? And same thing for currently Biden. Like those are our counter arguments to rationalizing colonization, where as of now the people are finally realizing a point where to its very core that we can't fight it like that, even though we still are trying. Even Bernie Sanders in and of itself is a sort of pretty lackluster compromise, as much as I do like him and how much I do think he's like or AOC or any of those current progressives sitting in Congress right now are a bit of a compromise comparatively to what we really should be doing. So we've only really recently left exiting their playing fields in fighting, combating colonization. That's part of like up until now, really, we've been choosing betraying the fight, because betraying the fight is playing their game in and of itself. And I think that's also what they're saying, is that like they don't know what to do, but like definitely this isn't it. Yeah, that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and like everything that you said about like how even Bernie is like a compromise. As much as I love him and he's inspirational, like he's not necessarily like the peak of what we should be fighting for. Um, yeah, like there's definitely things that he has to offer, but then there's like so much more that we should be demanding. Um, let's see. I just want to. There was like some quotes. I don't know if anyone else has any quotes. We might wrap up. I might just read, maybe one more, just since this is going on. And I think we kind of just in discussion have talked about a lot of the points brought up in the preface. There was one quote that I did for sure want to read. It was, this is it. I just like flipped to it. That's so funny. Okay. So this is page 52, which is LII. It's the paragraph, the first full paragraph in the middle of the page. So it says, terrified, yes, at this new stage colonial aggression is internalized by the colonized as a form of terror. But by that, I mean not only the fear they feel when faced with our limitless means of repression, but also the fear that their own fury inspires in them. They are trapped between our guns, which are pointing at them, and those frightening instincts, those murderous impulses that emerge from the bottom of their hearts and that they don't always recognize. For it is not first of all their violence, it is ours, on the rebound, that grows and tears them apart. And the first reaction by these oppressed people is to repress this shameful anger that is morally condemned by them and us, but that is the only refuge they have left for their humanity. Read Fanon. You will see that in a time of helplessness, murderous rampage is the collective unconsciousness of the colonized. I really just this quote. I love that Sartre is saying that it's not that when people are violent, when colonized people are violent towards the colonizers, it's not their violence. They're actually reflecting first the violence of the colonized. And I just like loved that he said that just because there was this really, really great video by this person I think named Kimberly Jones, who talks about like the violence of that so many of the Black communities face in the U.S. and just how that there's like generations and generations and generations of violence that have happened from like literal violence, and then also just like preventing Black people from being able to accrue wealth, or Black people on the masses, and how like that is how there's just been like violence, and like how there's like this moment where people are responding to that violence, and at times with violence, and it's like that's just something that just really, really stuck with me. Especially like I used to be like consider myself a pacifist when I was like in high school. I was like, yeah, violence is always bad, and I kind of think that narrative is really dehumanizing. I think it's often used against the wrong people. First off, it's like used against people who are like oppressed, and I don't know. I'm just like really excited to read this book. I don't know. I kind of just lost where I was going with that, but like I just think I just really agreed, basically. And another thing that I really liked is that Sartre says, okay, I didn't have to reread the whole quote, but basically he's saying that like in this violence, people are finding their humanity, that this whole time that they're like being oppressed, like they can't really like have this like self-actualization. And then in this violence and anger, people are put in this position where like it's the only way that they can find their humanity is to fight back against this like oppressive system. And Sartre emphasizes that a lot. He talks about or is it Sartre? It's either Sartre or like in the Foreword, but someone talks about like a soldier who like is like fighting in a war, and how their wife is killed and their child is killed and they're about to be killed, but they're still like in fighting this war, like that's their last act of humanity because that's all they have. And that painted just such like this vivid picture. And again, going back to the beginning of the foreword where it starts off with Franz Fanon's death, you know, it's like that's definitely this metaphor for like that's what Franz Fanon is doing. He's not literally fighting in the war, but him being a writer and going up against colonization, he very much is that soldier who feels like he's lost so much to colonization and is just exhausted at this point. And this is him finding his humanity. And there's just a way where I could relate with that because I felt so, not that I've been like in a, America is colonized and being colonized, but I haven't been to like the degree like that Franz Fanon has grown up in. And I grew up middle class, and there's like all these ways that I'm very privileged. But there's just this way where I've had so much anger towards white people growing up because I'm like, why am I so less human? I'm just not as human to a lot of these people, and it's not on purpose, but I'm basically not as human to a lot of the white people I grew up around with, and I've been so angry about it. And then people were like, well, you shouldn't be angry, or like you have to say things nicely, or like stuff like that. And just the anger I've had, like I feel exhausted, and like to me, like racism has been this overwhelming, overarching issue of my life. And it's like, just the anger I have, like trying to find my me trying to find my humanity. And there's another quote in here that I can't quite find, but it talks about, I lost my train of thought. Something about, I wish I could remember, but yeah, basically like finding your humanity, in anger, and that being your last refuge. And I know it sounds melodramatic because I didn't like live through a revolution, but it just really resonated with me. Any thoughts on that?
I think, can you? There
You can go. Sorry.
Go. You go ahead.
Okay. I think it's interesting because the preface by Sartre is like the part of the book trying to essentially tell colonizers that the book they're about to read isn't like for them, that it'll be like about them. And that what Sartre is trying to do is prepare the reader to read a book like that, and to essentially do some like pre-work to translate what Fanon will be saying to a more Western audience. And I think it's interesting that like when Sartre was being criticized as too violent, that perhaps the problem is actually that the way Sartre has to communicate to the Western audience is because like in a way the colonizer's language is essentially violence, something like that. So I think there's something to that, maybe. Like I think there's a moment, especially around the parts where he's having the Frenchman conversation, where he's like, why should a Westerner read this book? And gives two reasons: to take advantage of it, to discuss your true self as an object. And this should produce shame, and hopefully that shame can produce a revolutionary feeling or something like that. And then the second reason is to understand violence, that they've grown comfort due to the violence of their, effectively the empire, that even if they're against the empire, they're still, reaping its benefits. So they should not be surprised when that violence rebounds on them, I guess.
That's a great point. Like how like intrinsically in the language, it's violent. Like it's weird. It's absolutely weird how much that is reflected in it. My point that I was gonna make with what going on with what Lua was saying about how about that anger. Sometimes, especially now, it feels like anger is all we have in common. Sometimes, so, or at the very least, is something, the one thing we definitely all have in common. Because you meet people like who are like the same color as you, or they're also queer or something like that, who clearly don't have or aren't interested in going super far into the language or the labels and stuff like that. They're not interested in saying like, oh, I'm an anarchist or I'm a leftist. They just like live life to the best of their ability, authentically, not really realizing that they really can't. And so like you feel like you have nothing in common. Like the one thing you do have in common is the anger over you clearly being dehumanized, whether they want to call it that or not. So there is like an inherent solidarity in that, no matter how much like you don't identify as the same thing. So that anger, I think, is really important for unification and for understanding each other at a very base level, even if we're not going to agree on what term to call it or what particular political label you want to put on it. So I think that's like really important for when discussing that kind of stuff with people.
Yeah, I definitely think I do think it's interesting that like there is this kind of like commonality of like when I talk to other Black people, like even if they're not like leftist or something, it's like we often can just like start talk about our racist experiences or something, or like it's just really interesting how like there's like this common thread, and like it's just I don't know, it's been really uh yeah, I don't know, it's just really interesting. But yeah, I think I don't know, it's also why I wanted to read the uses of anger too at some point. It's just one essay, so we could do it in like one sitting, but it's by Audre Lorde, and it just talks about how anger is actually a really helpful emotion because anger puts your attention on an issue that's really important. And it's really frustrating that it's often just seen as like being like blindly violent and just out of control, when it's like it's actually a really important emotion to listen to. I just thought of something really funny when I was at one of the protests. There was like this Black Women's March, and someone was saying like, I'm so tired of like people calling Black women angry, and I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated and sad that about the violence that's happened to us. And then like this Black woman who came up after her, who's also Black, she was like, you know what, I am really angry. She's like, I am so angry. And then she just went on this like long rant about how angry she was. And then after that, everyone hugged her. And it was like it was really beautiful. But I loved, because I feel like the first person was trying to be like, stop painting Black people as just angry, which, there's a way where like people use anger to be dismissive. And I like how the person was saying like, we are angry, and instead listen to that anger. And everyone came around her and hugged her. It was like a crowd of like just like a lot of people, like everyone just like grouped around her. And I think this is kind of like, I think there's a way where like that anger can actually be very humanizing. And I'm really frustrated that Hannah Arendt was like, oh, like there can't be like humanization that comes out of violence, because I think anger is very violent, and anger leads to violence, and violence often comes out of anger. But I think there's like a lot of I think that's a very white perspective, because it's again like something that's been very humanizing. In my experience too, has been like this commonality of like, we're all angry about this, and we're angry about this because we as people deserve respect, and we're not getting treated with humanity. And it's something that like that we can find our humanity in. And it's I wish it was talked about that more. And again, that's why I'm super excited to read this, because I want to talk more about like the anger and violence, because that's something that our society tries to keep hush hush, and like you're just not supposed to do it, like, and then it ends up being a one-way street where it's okay for the government to be violent towards poor people and towards Black people and towards like all these different groups of people, but you can't lash out back at them. And it seems like this book is specifically about like returning that violence with violence. And I'm interested in that. And I'm afraid that people will take that out of context and take it as like I'm someone who just wants to like hurt people, but I'm not. I feel like oftentimes people are put in an impossible situation, and what do you do with that? So I'm excited to read more about that. I feel like we've covered a lot of what the preface said. Does anyone want to add any like final quotes they liked or any thoughts on that? Okay, cool. Well, that seems like a good wrap up then. That was like almost 2 hours. But yeah, thanks so much for coming. Um, and hold on, let me just see if there's any. Uh, there's still 17 people here. Sorry, I'm just looking at the comments in the stream because I want to read it out. So Draxa says, I don't really know how to disentangle academic language from being white coded. Um, I think that's true. I think a lot of academic jargon. One way that I disentangle academic language is I kind of when I write essays, I'll try to speak the way that I talk, but I don't want to ramble on since we're sort of wrapping up. Hey, Woo Hooligan! Shout out to Woo Hooligan. Go check out their channel. Um, okay, that's a good stopping point. Let's meet uh, in a couple weeks on Sunday and finish up the first chapter, which I think is just called On Violence. Ooh, that's exciting because I'm like, I want to learn more about violence. And the next chapter is called Violence. That's great. I feel like people are going to take this out of context and be like, you're a very violent, maybe I am a violent person. I don't know. So that ends on page, oh gosh, 62. So it's going to be a long one, but we're meeting every couple weeks. So it's like, I don't know. Does that work for everybody? Okay, cool.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Okay, and we can talk about it more in the Discord. Thanks for everyone who's here on the stream, and thanks for watching. If you would like to join, just become a patron, and then I'll message you a link to the Discord. But yeah, thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you next time. All right, bye, everyone.